Hi, I'm so sorry I can't be at Config this week, but I'm super grateful to everybody at Figma for making this work so that I can show you my studio here in Dublin where I work and where I make my movie props. Making things like old newspapers, doing things with analog tools like feather quills, rubber stamps. Are you really a graphic designer for film until you've made a top secret rubber stamp? And also where I have things like the Mendel's boxes that I made for Grand Budapest Hotel. If you guys want to have a go at making your own graphic props portfolio, then do send me a message on Instagram so that I can send you some feedback on your work. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do think it has to be in some way tactile, in some way made with an analog tool, and it has to be characterful, and it has to tell a story. So I'm a graphic designer for filmmaking, but specifically period filmmaking, which means that I work on movies and shows that are set in any time period pre probably 1980s. I think even 1990s is probably too modern for me because I specialize in making paper props. So all the old paper documents that actors have to use in period filmmaking, like old telegrams, antique newspapers, old packaging, tickets, cigarette boxes, uh, luggage tags, and all these kind of things that dress a set that nobody really notices or ever sees up close. Basically, anytime you see a character in a movie read a newspaper, somebody somewhere had to make that newspaper. And it's a really fun job. It has its downsides, which I'll get to later on, but it's a really fun job and it's a really exciting world to work in. And I think it really suits my sensibilities as an artist and a designer, because it's a combination of crafting and also storytelling. I didn't always do this. Many moons ago, I used to work in an ad agency. That was one of my first jobs when I graduated from design school. And I wasn't very good at it, and I didn't really like it. And I don't know which comes first. Like, can you like something that you're not good at? And can you ever really be good at something that you don't enjoy? The two things probably go hand in hand. Um, but I was very young. I was 22. I was a recent graduate. And I can see now, looking back, that actually you're not supposed to be good at design when you're that young. Design is something that you get good at as you go along. But I felt very insecure about not being a good designer fresh out of school. And also, I think this was a bit of a double whammy because I was working in an ad agency in Reykjavik in Iceland, where they have a very, beautiful design aesthetic, very Scandinavian aesthetic, very minimal, beautiful kerning, beautiful muted colors, lots of white space. And that really wasn't my style at all. So I began to come to the conclusion that I just wasn't good at design. I came from a very different aesthetic background. I grew up in a forest in rural North Wales. Both my parents were artists. My mum drew a lot. She painted a lot. My dad was also a potter and a photographer. I really love this picture of me as a baby that she drew because it says on it, Annie 1 day old, which means that she must have brought her sketchbook into the hospital with her when she went into labour. She was always drawing. She was constantly drawing with sketchbook. And as I grew up, then I had a very tactile approach to design, and I used a lot of paint and glue and colour. I suppose I had quite a messy aesthetic, for want of a better word. And this just didn't really fit in with the kind of the Nordic advertising commercial style that I was working to. So I decided that I was going to leave advertising behind and also leave design behind completely, actually, and go to Dublin and go back to school and study filmmaking, thinking that I would go to film school to learn how to be a screenwriter or a camera operator or a director, because I just felt that design wasn't for me. And of course, what happened in film school was I got a whole new world of design opened up to me, and that was design for screen. And I found that this was something that I was quite good at, actually. I mean, it was still a steep learning curve, and there was an awful lot to learn. But I did feel that naturally, I was just more geared up for this kind of work. And the other great thing about working in film design is there are no bad fonts. And we're designing all the lettering that goes into a film set that is not necessarily the most beautiful or finesse lettering, but sometimes it has to feel like it comes from the vernacular, that it comes from industrial lettering and the signage that's painted up into cities that is not necessarily made by the best sign painter in town. Or we're making designing typesetting for like really cheaply printed old letterpress posters from the 1800s. Or we're designing stained glass lettering with, bright blues and yellows and greens and purples. Or we're making lettering that is supposed to look as if it has been drawn up very lovingly by the waitress who works in the restaurant, in the fake restaurant that we're now creating for a film set. And then sometimes, of course, we do have to make lettering that's extremely exquisite, like, for example, 14th century calligraphy. But in this case, we'll make it with a feather quill. And if it is extremely complicated, I will always hire a real calligrapher to come in to the set and help us with it, as long as their hands match the hands of the actor playing the role, because actors often need a hand double to do their calligraphy. It's actually really difficult for an actor to do their own calligraphy. It's easier for them, I think, to do their own stunts than it is for them to do their own calligraphy, because calligraphy is really tricky. So this is a really fun world to work in, but it's not without its hurdles. And I think when I'm teaching my workshop students, the first hurdle that I have to get my students over is, the first hurdle is just to get them to step away from their computers and to start doing things the analog way and start crafting by hand again, whether that's just using a pencil and a ruler or a pen or a feather quill or whatever it is. And then the second hurdle is, I think, getting people to understand that it's okay to copy. I sometimes find that with young designers or graduates, they have this kind of inbuilt feeling that in order for their work to be of value, it has to be completely original. And I don't think that's true. It's certainly not true in film design. And I know that like copying is getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment because of AI. AI is like the thief in the room, but I'm not talking about like looking at the work of your peers on Dribble or Instagram and stealing their work. I'm not talking about using AI. I'm talking about studying a map, for example, and letting that inform your line style, or studying a building and letting the architecture inform your costume design, for example. So we all have our input models. And I think that in film design, where we really succeed is when we're really open to like looking at the world around us, really studying it and being prepared to take and steal and borrow from it in order to create a world on our film set that feels somehow authentic. Is there anything less inspirational than starting any piece of artwork with like a blank digital canvas? It's like life drawing. Probably lots of you in the audience have done life drawing at some point in your studies. You remember your life drawing tutor always saying to you to stop looking at your own pencil and your own piece of paper and start looking at the life in front of you. There's a reason why they've hired this naked model to come and stand for 3 hours in this freezing cold room. And it's because we have to keep looking at the life in front of us. It's the same in film design. We have to keep looking back at our reference material in order to make something that feels in some way authentic. And then the third hurdle that I think I have to work quite hard to get my workshop students over is understanding that when we design for a film set, we're not always really designing as designers, but instead we have to, and this is the fun bit, step into the shoes of the character of the piece that we're designing. So say, for example, you have a baker character who has to put a name on a cake. As the graphic designers, it's our job to take care of that lettering because we do everything with lettering on it. So what we don't do is just choose some kind of like cakey looking font from a drop down list of fonts digitally. Instead, if we're really good graphic designers for film, what we'll do is we'll get a bag of icing sugar out and we'll see what it actually takes to put a name on a cake. Likewise, if you have a king who's signing an old ancient document, we don't design that king's signature using a ballpoint pen. But again, if we're really good film designers, we'll go down to the prop shed and we'll borrow the feather quill that the actor's actually going to use in shot, and we'll see what it takes to sign a piece of vellum with what is essentially a bird's feather. I know it sounds a little laborious, and it can sound, I think when you're new to this topic, it can sound like, surely there's a quicker way to do all this. But I learned the hard way not to do it the quick way, so you don't have to. And the other thing is, sometimes it is slower to use analog tools, but it's not always slower. Okay, sometimes it's actually quicker as well. I'll give you one example. Say if we're making an FBI antique rap sheet, a record of arrests and prosecution, like what would be the quickest way to put a suspect's fingerprints on a document like this? Well, we're not going to design it digitally. We're not going to use AI because AI can't draw hands. But we're just going to press our fingers into pads of ink, and then we're going to press that ink onto the piece of paper, and it takes literally seconds. That's my dad, by the way, in that old FBI document. And I love this photo because it's his old passport photo from the 1960s. But as soon as I fixed it onto this prop, he suddenly begins to look like a serial killer. So what I do with my students is I set them a project. And project is to take a story that they love. It could be a story that they loved when they were a child, or a book or a play that they've been really into recently. And I asked them to take a character from that story and design 5 props based around that character that can tell that character's story. Like, how are you going to now tell this amazing story through 5 pieces of paper? And I think some of the things they come up with are so interesting. I always try and get them to make at least one 3-dimensional object, even if that object is, made out of paper, like a pack of playing cards or a pack of chewing gum or a matchbox or a cigarette packet. Or it could also be a glass bottle that you need to put a label onto, and then you can have great fun going vintage bottle shopping on eBay or in a junk shop somewhere. And then I always ask them as well to include color, because it's very tempting when you first start designing for old pieces to just make 5 brown pieces of paper. But of course, there's always been color, always. So it's important that we try and include color now in our designs today. I also asked them to include some kind of handmade lettering. It could be something as simple as period handwriting. It doesn't have to be fancy calligraphy, but I think it needs some kind of handmade lettering. And then I also asked them to include what I like to call a boring form. And boring forms have somehow over the years become my speciality. And I actually love making this kind of thing. So these are old bureaucratic documents, very, very ephemeral pieces that are full of just very small, detailed typographic elements with lots of anomalies in them on all kinds of different muted colours, pieces of paper. I'm actually working on a Spielberg movie at the moment, making these kind of forms for the last mid-century. And I really feel like it's one of my favourite parts of the job. And if you ever get into film design, you'll probably end up making a lot of fake, boring, old paperwork as well. This is Joel's work. He was one of my workshop students who sent me a homework collection that he based on Grease the musical, because that was a movie that he really loved. And I love this collection because that piece on the left there is an antique box of condoms. And I thought that was a really fun prop to make, because a lot of people send me old, like, World War II documents, but nobody had ever sent me a box of condoms before. So that was fun. And then Joel's boring form I thought was excellent. That pink form in the middle, it's some kind of motor tax certificate. But what I like about it is it's so convincing. I don't even have to really look at it for too long. I just know immediately that it's very authentic feeling because he's really gone into detail on all these tiny little typographic anomalies. And I love that he's printed it on pink paper as well, because we're staying in the world of Grease the musical. He went on to intern with Mina Lima, the Harry Potter designers. This is Hannah's work. I love this collection. She made this for Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. And I thought one of the pieces in this collection that I loved the most was this piece, which I think is a really exquisite piece of prop design, because what she's showing me here is the back of the document. And if you look at it carefully, you can see that it's a note from a doctor's prescription pad. And even though it's the back, I can see she's really gone into lots of detail over all the different typographic elements like rubber stamps and handwriting and printing and using a typewriter, using a real typewriter. And it's really important to think about what is on the back of our pieces, because if you imagine when an actor is on set studying a document, the camera is looking at the actor and is looking at the back of the document. So a set decorator is always going to ask the graphic designer, what's going to go on the back of this thing? And if you've used the right paper, then all your beautiful work will shine through from the other side. This is Rachel's work. I thought this was a really lovely piece because Rachel really loved doing botanical watercolours. And I think it's really important when you design a collection of your own portfolio that you really bring some of yourself into the work, because this is your own portfolio piece. You can have fun with this and do whatever you like with this. So Rachel decided to choose the secret garden as her story so that she could make those lovely decorative seed packets. And she's now, she came to my workshop about 6 years ago, I suppose. She's now one of the graphic designers on Tim Burton's Wednesday, the Netflix series. This was Flora's work. She made this for Mary Poppins. You can see she's really had fun with the calligraphy and even things like going stationery shopping and like looking for those beautiful old antique paper clips, that kind of thing. This is how it's done. We all have to just, build the portfolio that we want for the area that we want to work in. You don't have to wait for permission from somebody. You don't have to wait for a brief or a commission. You just have to kind of get going and build a portfolio that you want. And that's what I suppose that's what I learned the hard way when I was younger and when I was studying filmmaking, because I had a graphic design background and now I was studying film. I assumed that I could just write to film producers and tell them what I was capable of. I really wanted to design movie posters. So I found a list of like 30 producers' email addresses or something, which was very lucky. And I emailed them all, introducing myself as a very confident young person. But I didn't show them what I could do. I was just telling them what I could do. And how many people do you think I heard back from? Nobody. Like, not one person got back to me. And then later on, some weeks later, I went to see a play here in Dublin, which I really liked, and I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I thought, I'm just going to design a fake poster for this theatre play. And I went out around Dublin with my camera, started taking photos, and I put together this poster, which I was very pleased with. I spent quite a lot of time on it. And then I sent the same email out again to the same 30 producers, and this time I attached an example of what I could do and what my style was like. And I think within a couple of days, somebody got back to me and said, we're making a documentary about a music school here in Dublin at the moment, and we'd love to have a poster that looked something like this. That was my first commission. I think I got paid €300 for that poster. And it was my first commission as a freelance graphic designer. That was in 2011. By 2013, so just 2-3 years later, I was working on the poster for the Grand Budapest Hotel, which seems like such a, it seems like such a quick move. But I think, what happened was I just began to get my ducks in a row. I also started working in TV and film after I graduated from film school. I started working on a TV show about the Titanic, about the building of the Titanic, which was absolutely terrible show. Nobody watched it. But because it was set in the early 1900s, I then had an opportunity to make all these pieces for this show, like to dress every set on that show, like all kinds of antique documents and tickets and telegrams and newspapers, all the things that I do now. So when I got a call after I wrapped that from Wes Anderson's producers looking for a graphic designer in Europe, because he was coming to Europe for the first time to make his first European movie at that point for the Grand Budapest Hotel, he was looking for somebody who had all these kind of things in their portfolio. And of course, I was able to show them. And he didn't care that nobody had watched the Titanic TV show that I had put my heart and soul into. All he cared about was the craft. So that's what I encourage my students now to do is start on the craft now. Don't wait. This is not to say that, that like my career has been plain sailing since then. I still make mistakes all the time. Film is a very high pressure environment. And I still make mistakes and fail constantly. But I feel like I have a different attitude to it now, as to when I was young and working in advertising, because I don't let it bother me so much. I'll give you an example of a mistake that I am actually quite embarrassed about, or I was embarrassed about at the time. It was when I was working on my first Spielberg job, Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks, which was a true story set during the Cold War. And when Spielberg first briefed us on that movie, he was very keen that all the pieces we were going to make would be quite realistic, because it was a true story. And he really just wanted to cement the audience in this very specific time and place. So like 1957, Berlin and New York. That was fine by me. I had come from a historical drama background. I was used to making realistic pieces. But it was also thrilling to me because, I had grown up on Spielberg's movies. And one of the things I treasure about his work is that he had made these incredible worlds so real to me as a kid. And now here I was with this opportunity to make his worlds more real for him. Like this was mind-blowing to me. So yeah, I jumped headfirst into this and I was delighted. I was absolutely delighted to make these pieces for him. So you can imagine my distress when one night, months after the movie was released, I was scrolling online, searching Reddit and IMDb Goofs pages for mistakes that I'd made, of which there are plenty listed online. And I saw this. During the courtroom scenes for the 1957 trial, the American flags flanking the judge were not introduced until 1960. At the time of the trial, there were only 48 states. The flags have 50 stars. 3 out of 5 people found this interesting. You can see what's going on here, right? The flags that I had drawn up for the movie should have been made before Alaska and Hawaii were states. But instead, I drew them up with 50 stars, even though they were for 1957. This was quite mortifying. But as I thought about it, I did think to myself, hang on a minute, I remember that scene. And I remember the courtroom scene. The flags weren't flying or hanging, they were draped. So how was anybody able to count the number of stars on the flag? Well, it's because on the 48-star flag, the stars are all stacked as columns, and on the 50-star flag, the stars take on a different pattern. So if you're an eagle-eyed pedant, it's actually quite simple to see this mistake in many, many movies that are set during the last mid-century. I think even Oppenheimer movie got into trouble for this. It's not just me. I try not to take these things to heart, because I don't really think they're as much about a beef with what we do in the art department as they are more of a little competition online between people trying to out-nerd each other, right? But I do think it's a good example of how much we work to get right in a movie. It's like, these are the little things that they've got on us, right? It takes a lot of people to make a film. The art department is actually just a small cog in the much bigger filmmaking process. And in turn, the graphic designers in that art department are another smaller cog in that wheel. But I think the way that filmmaking works is that everybody who works on a film set has to believe that they are the most important part of the wheel. So, for example, the costume department must think that the clothes are the most important part. And the set designers must think that the architecture is the most important part. Cinematographer probably thinks it's something to do with them. Pretty sure the actors think it's all about cast. But of course, in the graphics department, we know that it's really all about us.